Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something that honestly sounds like pure sci-fi, but as our source material lays out, is entirely, chillingly real. We're talking about the actual mechanics of modern mind control. Now, I know. You hear mind control and you're probably rolling your eyes a bit, but we're absolutely not talking about swinging pocket watches or magical spells here. What we're going to break down today is the highly effective, completely jargon-free methodology of behavioral engineering. We're going to tear down exactly how psychological manipulation actually works, looking at the specific exploits used to completely bypass a person's mental firewall. So if you're focused on understanding the actual nuts and bolts, the real architecture of how human behavior gets engineered, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Because here's the thing. When you hear the phrase mind control, your brain probably goes straight to Hollywood tropes, right? We've all seen those movies. You think of, sci-fi serums, glowing eyes, hypnotic trances, the whole shebang. But the true crime reality, which is drawn directly from our source material on behavioral engineering, is so much more grounded. And honestly, that makes it scarier. Modern manipulation doesn't rely on magic or impossible fictional chemicals. You literally don't need any of that when a target's environment is perfectly controlled. Instead, real-world control relies on a carefully constructed psychological architecture. It's really about taking the human brain and using its own natural wiring against it. And it does this primarily through two key things: isolation and rapport. Which actually brings us to the core thesis of our source material. The quote reads, "You don't need a secret serum to control someone's behavior. You just need to understand the psychological architecture of isolation and rapport." Really think about the immense weight of those two concepts for a second: isolation and rapport. This right here is the absolutely crucial bedrock. See, before any kind of psychological hack or specific interrogation tactic can even happen, this foundation has to be laid. First, a target is cut off from their normal support systems and their usual grip on reality. That's your isolation. Then, the manipulator steps in to build a totally false sense of trust, safety, and connection. And that's the rapport. It's this foundational 1-2 punch that perfectly preps the mind for everything that comes next.
So, once that psychological bedrock of isolation and rapport is established, the real work begins. Let's move into our next section, the arsenal, engineering human behavior.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is our first major tactic, the Mr. Big technique. This is a profound, incredibly elaborate piece of behavioral engineering. The goal here isn't just to trick someone with a simple, everyday lie. No, it is entirely focused on creating a completely fake reality. Just imagine that for a second. Having your entire perception of what's real and what's false systematically dismantled, and then fully replaced by a manipulator. By engineering a total 360-degree scenario, we're talking a fake organization, fake colleagues, a completely fake environment that feels 100% real to the target. The manipulator gains absolute control over how that target reacts and makes decisions. They literally control the very reality the target exists in.
Next up, we look at the Reid technique, specifically focusing on the monologue aspect. Now, the crucial point to understand here is how this conversational exploit systematically justifies an act to a suspect. Once you have a subject locked into that isolated environment, the interrogator uses a one-sided monologue to actively minimize the subject's guilt. And this is kind of wild. Instead of aggressively accusing them like you'd expect, the interrogator might actually offer excuses, moral justifications, or even shift the blame completely away from the target. Why is that so incredibly effective? Well, because it perfectly bypasses a subject's standard psychological defenses. Think about it. If you're suddenly handed a narrative where you don't have to feel entirely guilty, your guard drops instantly. You lean right into that rapport we talked about.
But listen, not all tactics are about minimizing guilt or playing nice. We also have pride and ego down. While that Reid monologue acts as a soft backdoor bypass, this is a highly targeted, aggressive, and direct frontal attack. This tactic is used to systematically destroy a person's sense of worth. When an interrogator strips away a person's self-esteem, belittling their ego, and just completely shattering their pride, that person is left desperately grasping for validation or just a way out of the intense pressure. It leaves the target incredibly vulnerable to influence. Without their pride or ego to act as a defensive shield, the manipulator can easily step right in, assert total authority, and dictate the terms.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a cohesive, truly chilling system. Step 1. Isolate the target. You cut them off from their moorings. Step 2. Establish a completely fake reality using that Mr. Big technique, so they literally only have your truth to rely on. Step 3. Minimize their guilt with a monologue to lower their initial defenses and build up that twisted rapport. And finally, Step 4. Attack their ego to break any remaining resolve. None of this is random. It's a highly calculated, deeply systematic process used to take apart a person's psychological defenses piece by piece, until there's absolutely nothing left but compliance.
Up to this point, we've really been looking at these tactics through the specific lens of an interrogation room or high-level, organized behavioral engineering. But our source material asks us to zoom out now and reframe these concepts entirely. So let's look at this paradigm shift: social engineering. And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference in how we actually need to think about security today. When we hear the word hacking, we almost always immediately think of bypassing computer systems, right? Writing complex code to break through firewalls or stealing passwords. But social engineering uses those exact same principles of hacking and applies them directly to human psychology to gain control. It's literally bypassing the human firewall. The system being hacked here isn't a server in a server room somewhere, it's a person.
Let's cement this with a final takeaway drawn straight from our source. The quote reads, "Manipulation is the process of using psychological vulnerabilities rather than technical hacks to gain control." There's absolutely nothing mystical about it. Actually, this is exactly why things like Nigerian prince scams and phishing emails are still working today. These vulnerabilities, our deep need for connection, our ego, our intense desire to feel justified in our actions, they are completely observable. And because they're observable, they can be systematically engineered and exploited by literally anyone who understands the architecture.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to chew on. Are your psychological vulnerabilities exposed? Seriously, think about the architecture we just tore down today. The isolation, the rapport, the creation of fake realities, the guilt minimization, the brutal attacks on your ego. Are your own mental firewalls strong enough to recognize when you're being socially engineered? Understanding this architecture is the absolute very first step in recognizing it out there in the wild. So keep your firewalls up, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next explainer.